First, we'll see what pivot tables are and how to create them. Then we will see how to create groups within the pivot tables. Then we will see how we can apply slicers to these pivot tables. Then we'll learn about pivot charts. Then we'll see how we can remove the blank cells if there are any in the pivot tables. Then we'll see what are the shortcuts available for pivot tables. Okay, so a pivot table is basically a table which summarizes the data in different forms. Okay, so you might have some raw data and you can create a pivot table out of it, and this data could show you data in a specified, or filtered format. It might include sums, averages, or any other kind of statistics, which makes the data representation in a meaningful way. Okay, but there are some pre-checks that you have to do when you are working on the pivot tables. First, that the data should have a unique column, so they should be in order, right? The data should not be jumbled up. For example, let's say you are talking about names, so all the names should be in one column. The Let's say the amount, all the amounts should be in another column. It should not be that your name and the amount columns are mixed, or the values are mixed in one column, right? So it has to be unique. And secondly, we should make sure that we should not have any blank columns in between. Okay, because if we have blank columns, then we might not get the exact result that we want, right? And to use or to start with pivot table, you have to go to the insert menu and choose the option pivot table. So let's go inside the template and check out how to create it. Okay, so this is the template file where we'll see how we can create the pivot tables. And this is my data. So if we see, there are different columns. The first one is the serial numbers. The second one is area. So different areas from Delhi. Then we have the first name, the last name, the account number of the person, the balance which is held for different persons, and whether they have paid the yearly fee for the account or not. Right. So you see each column has a unique data, and no two datas from different columns are mixed, right? And now we'll go ahead and create the pivot table, right? So the first step is you select the data that you want, okay, in the table, and then go to the insert menu and click on pivot table. That's the first option here. Okay, so once you do this, you will get a pop-up. It will say select the data table or range. So we have already done that. Okay, so it's A2 to G27. So A2 till G27, right? And it gives us an option whether we want the table on the existing sheet, on the or the new worksheet. I recommend always to do it on a new worksheet. So we click on OK, and this is the interface or the sheet that we get. Now, here we will have to define the various rows and columns and what we finally want to see in the pivot table. Okay, so for this, let's see some examples. So I've mentioned some examples here so that it's easy for you to understand and relate why we need those tables or how to create those tables. So let's say we have a question which says how many people have paid the yearly fee. Okay, you want to list that. So obviously you will have to count here the numbers of yes and then the number of no, maybe, just to cross check, and then the total value, right? But what if you get the result like this automatically? So this can be achieved using a pivot table. So what we'll do here is we'll go to the sheet 2, and in the row names, so basically if you see, we have the row labels here and then the count of the first name, right? And the row label here contains either yes or no. Okay, so the same what we'll do here. So yearly fee paid is the column which contains the yes or the no. I'll select and drag it to the rows column here. Okay, this is the place where we define our table, right? So now you see the row labels are no and yes. So it has already taken the value from that data. And the final result that we want to see is the count and the count of the names. So we can take the first name and put it to values. Okay, and it'll take the count of the first name. So now you see it's count of the first name, and you get the result, and you can clearly see that 18 people have paid the yearly fee and 7 people have not paid the yearly fee, right? So that is the way you can design your table. So You don't have to see the entire data. It's just the crux out of that entire data and the answer to your question, how we could see like how many people have paid the fee and how many people have not paid the fee. And so this is the place wherein you could define the rows, columns, and values, right? Okay, so let's move them back and let's see the other question, the next one. The next one is, what is the contribution or balance from each area? So for example, you have to see that. Now, this might look simple to count the yes or no, but here then you will have to first count different areas and then total the values or the amount for each area, which is difficult, and especially in case when you will have a lot of entries, right? But using pivot table is just a matter of selection and of the rows and what you need as the result. Okay, so let's see how this works. So we'll go here, and in this case now we'll choose the area and put it to the rows. So I get all the areas here and the balance to the values. So I get the sum of balance, and we are done. So we know that from East Delhi this is the total contribution, from North Delhi this is the total contribution, from South Delhi this is the total contribution, this is the total contribution from the West Delhi, and that's the grand total, right? So it automatically calculates from the data. You don't have to go to each area and sum up all the balances from different area. Yeah, so this makes it very easy to organize your data to get the desired results that you want. Let's see one more example. Now, if I go to sheet 1, now this is an extension to what we have seen here. Now, it says how many accounts are in each area. So we already have created a table which has the sum of the balances, but we also want to get a count of the account numbers, right? So we can go back here, and if I select the account number and also put it to the values field, then you see I get another column which says sum of account numbers. Okay, so basically what it's doing is it's doing the sum by default, but I don't want the sum, I want the count. So what I'll do is I'll click on this drop down. Okay, I'll go to the value field settings here. Okay, and here instead of sum, which is the default selection, I will choose the option count. Okay, so you can select here average, maximum, minimum, product. So there are a lot of things that could be chosen, but as I need the count, I click on count, and you see we get the value of the counts, and these are the total accounts 25, and these are the counts from East Delhi, North Delhi, South Delhi, and West Delhi respectively, right? So that is the way you can modify the pivot table according to your own need, and you can get the desired result. Also, you could add more columns here, you could add filters here. So if let's say for example you need a filter, you could drag some kind of filter and place it here, right? But here I'm not going to show you the filter thing, because for filtering there is another good option which is called the slicer. So we'll talk about the slicers later, and there the filtering concept is far better than what we can do here, right? But definitely you can try this, right? Another thing what I wanted to show here is that you have the flexibility to rename this. For example, now if I want to name it as areas, so this will become area. You could change the heading of this one. So custom name, you could define it as sum, okay, and sum of area, for example. Okay, so you are free to define the names of the columns so that your table looks more meaningful. Okay, so that's the way the pivot table in principle works. You could have different settings, and you can get different kinds of results very quickly. Okay, so let's go back to the template file and go to the next topic. Now the next topic is creating groups. Okay, so it is possible to select any two or more row labels and form a group, and then this group can be expanded or collapsed as required. Okay, so let's go back to the template file and have a look into that. So let me come to the sheet 2, and for example I want to combine these two areas, East Delhi and North Delhi. So I select both of them, I do a right click, I say group. So now this becomes a group, which is the group 1. So if I you know uh, collapse it or expand it, then you see that in the group we have two areas, or we could see group one. The interesting part is then the other two areas also become group, whether they have a single area or not. So that's also done here, but you could select both of them and then say group. So now we have two groups. Okay, so the group one contains East Delhi and North Delhi. The group 2 contains South Delhi and West Delhi. So you can easily group the areas, or the row labels here, and you see when once you expand or collapse, the corresponding values also keep on changing. Okay, so that's the way how you can use groups in the tables. Okay, going back to the presentation, now comes the slicer part that I was talking about earlier. So slicers provide a button that will allow you to filter the pivot tables. So it gives us a quick filtering interface, and we can see it graphically on next to the table, that what values are we seeing based on what kind of filters. So it's a very good representation, and it's also very convenient. And to insert a slicer, you have to go to the pivot table analyze and then insert a slicer. Okay, so let's go to the template and try to insert a slicer here. So once you are on the table, okay, and then you can see this tab which is called pivot table analyze, and here you have the option to insert a slicer. So I'll insert a slicer here, and a slicer is a kind of a window that will show up here, okay, based on what you select here. So for example, I want to make it a slicer which says yearly fee paid, okay, and I click on OK. So this is my slicer. It looks pretty good and professional. And now you see that both yes and no have been selected from the areas. Now you'll see the change in values when I make some selections here. So if I say yes, if I select yes, you see the total count has changed to 18, and also the values have decreased, and also the count numbers here have changed. Okay, so this is only showing the values of the people who have paid the yearly fee based on this slicer. You could select no, then you see only the data for people which have not paid the yearly fee. So that's the way the slicer works. You are free to configure multiple slicers, and each of them works in coordination. Okay, so if there are two slicers and you have multiple selections, based on all the selections and the filterings that you do, the result will be displayed in the table. So that's the way the slicer works. Okay, so let's go to the next topic, which is the pivot chart. So a pivot chart is basically a visual representation of your pivot table, which means the data is already summarized, okay, in the form of, let's say you want the sums, averages, counts, or whatever, you have already done that, and then there's a chart which can be created out of it. So you can go to the pivot table analyze and use the pivot chart, and you can also combine slicer and chart and see the desired result. So that is also possible. So let's go back to the template file and see how pivot charts could be done. Okay, so I'll go to the pivot table, I'll select the pivot table and then go to the pivot table analyze. Okay, and here I would say pivot chart. Okay, so that's the button for the pivot chart. So I'll click on that, and this will show me the recommended chart that should be inserted. Okay, so there are different types of charts like column, line, pie, bar, and when you change to any of these, for example you go to line, okay, and you choose any kind of format. So based on what you have done, you'll see the result. Okay, from the preview in the pie, you will see that this is group 1, this is group 2, or in the bar you could also see that. But here, as suggested, this is the best view which will give us the result that we see in the table. And if we click OK, so here we get the pivot chart, right? So now here you see we have different groups, different areas, and the values which are represented. So it's almost 293761, so it's yeah, reaching here. Okay, and this is the sum of the areas from the group 1. Okay, and this is the sum of the areas from the group 2. Now this value is from the group 1 and this value is from the group 2, that is the count. So you can see those clearly. Now what you can do here is, let's say if I change something in the slicer, for example I activate the yes, so you see now the values have changed here. So the slicer is also linked to pivot table, so both of them are interactive, right? Any changes made here will also be done there. And for example I select both of them, then based on that the chart also changes. So that is the beauty of the pivot chart, that will show you the graphical representation of your pivot table, and it is also interactive or in line with the slicer and the options that you choose. Okay, and here you have a lot of options, so you could hide fields, you could remove fields, you know. Okay, so that's the way how this will work. Okay, and here if you go to different chart styles again, then you can get the different kinds of chart styles. So this is another chart style which looks good, right? So different kinds of formattings could be used as as you desire, as you want to show it on your sheet. Okay, so that's how the pivot charts work. So let's go back to the presentation and come to the next topic, which is removing blank cells. So blank cells in a pivot table could be filled by a default value if we define that in the pivot table options. So how to get to these options? We go to the pivot table and do a right click, and here we find the pivot table options. And here if you see on the layout and the format tab, you will find a place which says for empty cells. So if you do not have any value in one of the cells, whether it should be left empty or you could give it a default value of 0 or anything else not applicable, and then that value will come in the pivot table, right? Similarly, you have all these settings which are available for the pivot table. You could check out and change the settings as per your requirement. Okay, so that's about the blank cells. Then we come to the shortcuts. So basically you could go to the insert menu and insert a pivot table, or what you could do is you could select the data and click Alt DP, so which will open up the menu for the pivot table. Then you could make the selection of the data and specify whether you want to go for a new worksheet or the same worksheet, and then do a finish, and then your pivot table will be created.